5. The work shift. Last video we talked about how surplus was created. The capitalist makes the labor work beyond the time that is needed to reproduce his wage. From last example, from 6 hours of working, the laborer creates 10 shoes that when sold on the market, the capitalist gains just enough money to equal the initial amount he invested. He gets back the money that he wasted on raw materials and the wage he paid the labor. This is the break-even point. But the capitalist has to make a profit, of course. So he makes the laborer work another 6 hours to complete the 12 in total. This second set of 6 is all surplus labor. This is what gains the capitalist a profit. We can see that the work shift for wage labor under capitalism consists of these two portions. One that Marx calls the necessary labor. It's the initial portion where the laborer repays the wage that the capitalist pays him. In our example, it takes him 6 hours to create a value in the product of $3, and $3 is his wage. Then the necessary labor consists of 6 hours. And the second portion Marx calls surplus labor. It's the labor that creates a profit for the capitalist. The labor doesn't get paid for this. In our example, this also consists of 6 hours to complete the 12 in total. But this is just an example, right? The work shift isn't going to be structured exactly like this. The work shift can consist of 8 hours, as is common in today's society, perhaps 10 hours, as was common in Marx's time, or even something like 16 hours. Yes, it's true, people did used to work 16 hours. Not only can the total length of the work shift vary, but also the portion made up by the necessary labor and the surplus labor. From our moneybags example, the worker works 12 hours, 6 of them made up by necessary labor to repay his wage, and the second 6 made up by surplus labor. So the proportion would look like this: 6 hours surplus over 6 hours necessary to equal 100%. This means for every hour that the laborer works for himself to repay his wage, he gives another hour for free to the capitalist. Marx calls this surplus quotient, and I'm not joking, the rate of exploitation. But the rate of exploitation can vary. What if, from our example, instead of the worker working 12 hours, he now works 16 hours? Then now the laborer works 6 hours to repay his wage, just like before. Remember, his wage hasn't changed. But 10 hours to create a surplus for the capitalist. Before he was only working 6 hours of surplus. This has now been extended to 10. The rate of exploitation now would be 10 over 6 equals 166%. The capitalist increases the total profit surplus for himself and pays the worker the same. We can see that the capitalist can easily increase his profit by simply making the worker work longer. This seems obvious, but he cannot do this indefinitely, right? He cannot increase the work shift to 24 hours. The laborer, after all, is only a human being with physical needs. He needs time to recover his energies, he needs to sleep, to shower, to eat. He cannot make him work 24 hours because he would die and would not possess labor power anymore. But besides the worker's physical needs, he also has spiritual, social needs that he must satisfy. He must spend time with his family, must take part in recreational activities, he must feel a sense of fulfillment, whatever that may be. And the capitalist absolutely takes this into consideration. So he encounters a max limit to what he can extend the work shift. But if there's a max limit on the work shift, then is there a minimum limit that the laborer must work? Well, we had said before that he needs at the very least $3 every day to survive. He needs these $3 to purchase his means of life so that he can continue to live and thus produce labor power. The laborer takes 6 hours to create a value of $3, which is his wage. This is the necessary labor. Then 6 hours is the absolute minimum that the worker must work, at least from our example. Of course, because he lives under capitalism, he cannot simply call it quits after these 6 hours. He cannot say, well, through my labor of 6 hours, I've created a value of $3, which is what you're paying me. Now I am done here. We have traded equivalents. I don't owe you anything anymore. No, the capitalist purchases his labor power for 12 hours each day. That is what the contract says. To the worker, it looks like he is getting paid the value of 12 hours because that is the rate at which the capitalist pays him. He says, for 12 hours, I'll pay you $3. Or if he gets paid hourly, the contract will stipulate the pay is 25 cents per hour. 12 times 25 cents equals $3. We can see that the form of wage labor under capitalism hides the exploitation. It masks the extraction of surplus by making it seem like the worker is always working just to repay his wage, the necessary labor. But no, there is always a surplus added, work that he does not get paid for. We can also see that there is antagonism here between the goal of the capitalist and the goal of the laborer. The capitalist only cares about maximizing his profit. He will make him work as long as physically and legally possible, and pay him as low as legally and physically possible. All the labor is to him a commodity that he purchases for 8, 12, 16 hours each day and puts to use in that time. I was saying before that the capitalist runs into limits when extending the work shift. Actually, he doesn't care about this. If it weren't for the laws and regulation, he would absolutely extend this to an unhealthy amount. The labor, on the other hand, wants the complete opposite. He wants to get paid as much as possible while limiting his work time, preserving his labor power, so he can have time to, actually live his life. He sold his labor power to the capitalist. This is true. This was his choice. He didn't have to do this. But it is not really accurate to say that it was completely voluntary. Remember from my last videos we said that the condition that must be met in order for the laborer to sell his labor power as a commodity was that he possesses no other commodity other than his labor power. He doesn't have the capital or means to make his own commodities, to make his own business. Then he must sell his labor to purchase his daily bread. Our laborer doesn't have to sell his labor power specifically to moneybags, but he does have to sell it to a capitalist, or else he can't purchase his means of life. One might say, well, the laborer should be thankful that he was given a job in the first place. If it weren't for the capitalist that hired him, he would be on the streets begging. He would probably starve to death. That's absolutely correct. That's exactly what would happen. But did you ever stop and think, why is it like this? Why are the social conditions so that one portion of the population has a monopoly on the means of production, the things we need to work like capital, raw materials, workshops, machines, instruments, and another portion has absolutely nothing but the sweat of their brow, and their right to exist is dependent upon if they are able to sell themselves to a capitalist? Well, we all must work to live. You want to be lazy and not work, then you don't deserve to live. Absolutely. How great if workers only had to work what is required to live. But you can see here that under capitalism, laborers are not just working to live, the necessary time for their subsistence. They must work beyond this to make a profit for the capitalist that he sold himself to. So exploitation is a condition of working under capitalism. Basically, a capitalist will only hire you if he can extract a surplus from you, if he gains something from you. Well, this is just the way things are. This is the way things have always been, and therefore will continue to be. Marx says no to this. This is not the way things have always been, so there's no reason to believe it will always be like this. Capitalism is a fairly recent thing relative to the history of humanity. Labor power did not used to be a commodity that the larger portion of the population, the proletariat, must sell to the class of capitalists, the bourgeoisie. This has to do with the different modes of production, or the set of social conditions that govern the way society produces their goods, their necessities of life, in which capitalism is only one of them. But I don't really have time to cover this in this video. I will quote Marx verbatim to end things. This quote perfectly embodies the spirits and goals of the conscious labor. The commodity that I have sold to you differs from the crowd of other commodities, in that its use creates value, and a value greater than its own. That is why you bought it. That which on your side appears a spontaneous expansion of capital is on mine extra expenditure of labor power. You and I know on the market only one law, that of the exchange of commodities, and the consumption of the commodity belongs not to the seller who parts with it, but to the buyer who acquires it. To you, therefore, belongs the use of my daily labor power, but by means of the price that you pay for it each day, I must be able to reproduce it daily and to sell it again. Apart from natural exhaustion through age, I must be able tomorrow to work with the same normal amount of force, health, and freshness as today. You preach to me constantly the gospel of saving and abstinence. Good. I will, like a sensible saving owner, take good care of my only possession, labor power, and abstain from all foolish waste of it. I will each day spend, set in motion, put into action, only as much of it as is compatible with its normal duration and healthy development. By an unlimited extension of the working day, you may in one day use up a quantity of labor greater than I can restore in 3. What you gain in labor, I lose in substance. The use of my labor power and the spoliation of it are quite different things. I demand, therefore, a working day of normal length, and I demand it without any appeal to your heart, for in money matters sentiment is out of place. You may be a model citizen, perhaps a member of the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, and in the odor of sanctity to boot, but the thing that you represent face to face with me has no heart in its breast. That which seems to throb there is my own heart beating. I demand the normal working day because I, like every other seller, demand the value of my commodity.